The crowded, muddy square of the newly captured German town was a sea of human misery. It was April 1945. Hundreds of displaced civilians, exhausted refugees, and surrendered soldiers stood in a long, silent line, waiting to be processed by the military police of General George S. Patton's Third Army. Standing near the middle of the crowd was a man dressed in the dirty, oversized coat of a common laborer. His face was smeared with ash. He kept his head bowed, slowly moving forward with the rest of the refugees, hoping to blend into the background. He looked completely harmless. But 30 feet away, standing beside an American jeep, a young officer from the U.S. Army Counterintelligence Corps was watching the crowd. His eyes locked onto the man in the dirty coat. The American didn't see an exhausted farmer. He noticed the man's posture. It was too rigid, too practiced. He noticed his hands. They were soft, with no calluses from manual labor. The American officer walked into the crowd, tapped the man on the shoulder, and ordered him to step out of the line. Within minutes, the dirty coat was stripped away. The man's fake civilian papers were exposed as forged documents. Hidden beneath his shirt, investigators found the proof they were looking for. He was not a farmer. He was a senior operative of the Gestapo, the brutal secret police of the Third Reich. While Patton's tanks were racing across Germany, a silent, invisible war was raging in the shadows. Fanatical Nazi agents were discarding their black coats, burning their identification cards, and hiding among terrified civilians to prepare for a bloody post-war insurgency. To prevent a devastating wave of sabotage and guerrilla warfare, Patton's elite intelligence units had to hunt these shadows down. They had to dismantle a network of fear before the enemy could strike from the ruins. And the ruthless, highly efficient tactics they used would force the darkest characters of the regime to face the grim reality of total defeat. In the final weeks of the war in Europe, the traditional military map of Germany had completely ceased to exist. General Patton's Third Army was moving with a speed that defied military textbooks. Armored columns were bypassing major cities, racing deep into the German heartland, and leaving pockets of bypassed enemy forces behind them. The front line was no longer a solid border on a map. It was a phantom. While this rapid advance was a tactical masterpiece, it created a massive, dangerous problem. Behind the roaring American tanks lay a vast, chaotic landscape filled with millions of displaced persons, escaping prisoners of war and terrified refugees. And hiding within this massive wave of humanity were the remnants of Hitler's secret state police. The Gestapo and the elite SS knew the conventional war was lost, but they had absolutely no intention of surrendering peacefully. Under the direct orders of Heinrich Himmler, the regime had established the Werwolf program, a planned, underground guerrilla movement designed to fight a shadow war against the Allied occupation. Their plan was to hide in plain sight, let the main American combat units pass through, and then emerge to wage a campaign of terror. They planned to cut communication wires, poison water supplies, and execute any German civilian who cooperated with the American forces. For General Patton, this was an intolerable threat to his supply lines and his men. He knew that an army cannot advance if its rear is constantly under attack by invisible enemies. The responsibility of clearing the shadows fell to the G2 intelligence teams and the Counterintelligence Corps, or the CIC. These were the elite detectives of the United States Army. They were young, highly educated, and trained to spot a liar in a crowd of thousands. They had to separate the desperate victims of the war from the highly dangerous fanatics who had spent years torturing them, and they had to do it before the first sniper bullet was fired. To understand the immense difficulty of this mission, you have to realize how easily a war criminal could disappear in 1945. The Gestapo was the most feared organization in occupied Europe. But the moment the American tanks entered a city, the fearsome Gestapo agents did not stand and fight. They ran to their offices and burned their records, destroying the paper trails of their crimes. They discarded their leather coats, threw away their metal badges, and put on civilian clothes. They stole identity documents from dead Wehrmacht soldiers or forged papers claiming they were simple, innocent citizens from distant towns. They walked out into the streets, sat down in the refugee camps, and pretended to be victims of the very regime they had helped run. But Patton's CIC teams had developed a highly sophisticated, clinical system to dismantle their lies. When the Americans captured a town, they immediately established a strict control zone. They cordoned off the entire area with tanks and infantry, preventing anyone from entering or leaving. Then, they ordered every single adult male in the town to report to the main square for screening. The Americans did not rely on paper documents alone. They knew the papers could be forged. Instead, they relied on physical and psychological indicators. First, they checked the left armpit of every suspect. By law, every member of the Waffen-SS was tattooed with his blood group in that exact location. It was a permanent mark of membership in the Nazi elite. Many fanatical agents tried to cut or burn these tattoos off, but the raw, fresh scars only served as a confession of their guilt. Second, the investigators looked at their skin. Gestapo officers had spent the war sitting in comfortable offices, eating high-quality rations, and wearing high-collared uniforms. The investigators looked for military tan lines, pale skin on the neck and forehead, where the tight collars and officer caps had shielded them from the sun. They looked at their hands. A man claiming to be a coal miner or a farmer whose hands were soft and smooth was immediately taken aside for deeper questioning. The American detectives were stripping away their disguises, forcing the architects of terror to stand in the light of day. But capturing them was only half the battle. What Patton's men did to make them break would permanently shatter their fanatical resolve. The high-stakes screenings inside the captured town squares were masterclasses in psychological pressure. The American intelligence officers did not use physical torture. They knew that torture only produced false information and allowed the prisoner to feel like a martyr. Instead, they used the ultimate psychological weapon against the Gestapo, the loss of authority. The Gestapo had spent 12 years terrifying everyone around them. They believed they were intellectually superior to the Americans. The CIC officers completely weaponized this vanity. During the field interrogations, the Americans would treat the high-ranking suspects with absolute, cold indifference. They would ignore their military rank. They would make them wait in long lines in the mud for hours, alongside the common soldiers they despised. When a suspect was finally brought into the interrogation tent, he would find an American officer sitting quietly, surrounded by local German anti-fascists and liberated concentration camp survivors. This was the ultimate role reversal. The American investigators would bring in survivors who had lived under the Gestapo's tyranny in that specific region. They would ask the survivors to look at the suspects standing in the line. The psychological collapse was immediate. The captured Gestapo officer, stripped of his uniform and his weapons, had to stand in silence while the very people he had tortured pointed at him and identified him by name. The American GIs didn't need to say a word. The raw, accusatory stares of the survivors were enough to completely break the will of the Nazi fanatics. Faced with the undeniable evidence of their crimes and realizing that their neighbors and victims were testifying against them, the Gestapo officers completely fell apart. The arrogance vanished. They dropped their heads, began to tremble, and confessed to their true identities, desperately trying to blame their superiors to save their own lives. The master race was reduced to a collection of shivering cowards, pleading for mercy from the people they had tried to destroy. Once the hidden Gestapo and SS operatives were identified, Patton's Third Army moved swiftly to crush the werewolf insurgency before it could launch a single coordinated attack. The Allied advance depended entirely on secure, open supply routes. If German guerrilla units succeeded in destroying bridges or ambushing fuel trucks, the entire drive toward victory could be halted. Patton's response to the guerrilla threat was ruthless and highly efficient. Whenever a sniper fired at an American convoy or a communication wire was cut near a German village, the Third Army did not engage in gentle negotiations. They established a strict search and cordon operation. An entire battalion of infantry and tanks would surround the village. Every house was systematically searched. Every citizen was interrogated. During these raids, Patton's intelligence units discovered secret Gestapo caches hidden in the basements of ordinary homes and barns. These caches did not just contain weapons and wireless radios. They contained something far more chilling: execution lists. The Gestapo had compiled detailed lists of local German mayors, town officials, and ordinary citizens who had welcomed the American liberators or offered to cooperate with the post-war administration. The werewolves intended to assassinate these people to prevent the German population from accepting defeat. When the local German citizens realized that their own secret police were planning to murder them in their beds, whatever remaining support for the Nazi regime completely evaporated. The German population realized that the American soldiers were their only protection against the fanatical remnants of the Reich. They began actively pointing out the hidden bunkers, the weapons caches, and the identities of the stay-behind agents to the American military police. By exposing the true, monstrous nature of the Gestapo to the German public, Patton's intelligence units turned the population against the insurgency. The werewolf movement was strangled in its crib. Under international military law, the rules of the Geneva Convention are designed to protect uniformed combatants. But a Gestapo agent or an SS werewolf fighting in civilian clothing, hiding behind the cover of innocent refugees, was not a soldier. He was an illegal combatant. Under the laws of land warfare, they were classified as spies and saboteurs. They were not entitled to the comfortable privileges of a standard prisoner of war camp. General Patton's directives regarding these non-uniformed combatants were clear and uncompromising. If an agent was caught actively engaging in sabotage or carrying weapons in civilian clothing, they were subjected to immediate battlefield justice. Many were tried by quick, informal military commissions and faced the ultimate, inescapable consequences of their actions. But for the high-ranking Gestapo officers who had orchestrated the terror campaign, Patton's units had a different destination. They were immediately handed over to specialized war crimes investigators. The Americans knew that as the war ended, many of these highly dangerous men would try to disappear into the post-war vacuum. They would try to slip across borders or change their identities permanently. By establishing a massive, highly detailed database of fingerprints, photographs, and witness testimonies during the final advance, Patton's G2 intelligence units ensured that these war criminals were locked away securely before the final surrender was even signed. The highly organized network of the Gestapo, which had held an entire continent in a grip of absolute terror for 12 years, was systematically, legally, and permanently dismantled in a matter of weeks. The incredible quiet success of the Third Army's counterintelligence operations is one of the most overlooked masterstrokes of the European campaign. History books remember the massive tank battles and the brilliant sweeping maneuvers across the maps. But those victories would have been entirely meaningless if Patton's rear had been consumed by a bloody, prolonged guerrilla war. By utilizing highly sophisticated psychological screening, biochemical tells, and cooperating with local survivors, the young American intelligence officers achieved a total, bloodless victory over the darkest forces of the Reich. They proved that the American soldier was not just a powerful warrior, but an incredibly smart, highly capable defender of justice. When the fanatical Gestapo agents threw away their uniforms and tried to hide in the crowd, they believed that American decency would protect them. They believed the Americans were too soft to see through their lies. But they met an army that refused to be fooled. They met an army that matched their secrecy with relentless intelligence and answered their arrogance with the cold, hard reality of total defeat. The story of the Shadow War in Germany is a powerful historical reminder. True military victory is not just about crushing the enemy's tanks on the battlefield. It is about hunting down the darkness in the corners, exposing the truth, and ensuring that those who rule through fear are ultimately forced to answer to the light of justice. What do you think of the ruthless efficiency used by Patton's intelligence units to crush the Gestapo? Was stripping away their uniforms and forcing them to face their victims the perfect way to break their fanatical spirit? Please share your thoughts and your reflections in the comments section below. We read every single one. If you appreciate the raw, deeply researched and satisfying history of World War II, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story of true historical justice. Thank you for watching. Respect the fallen, honor the veterans, and never forget history. We will see you in the next video.